everyone, this is China Paradigm, where we, Dashi Consulting, interview seasoned entrepreneurs in China. Hello everyone, I'm Matthieu David, the founder of Dashi Consulting and its podcast China Paradigm, and today I'm with Yingzi Yuan. You are the Executive Director of Europe-China Foundation, and you have a very strong interest, and I can see that along all your different positions from your LinkedIn profile and from information we got on innovation between Europe and China. Thanks for being with us, Yingzi. And my first question is, what do you sell, to be a bit to direct? What do you sell with Europe-China Foundation? Who are your clients?
Yeah, actually, maybe it's a little bit different from the other broadcast guests from this show, because Europe-China Foundation is actually a non-profit organization. Our main goal is to connect Europe with China, European leaders with Chinese leaders in terms of culture and innovation. So currently, we are not selling anything, but we do have this membership program that is either for individuals or for companies. So people who want to participate in our event, in our program, can support us with a sponsorship, and then the whole amount will be used to implement and to optimize those programs. So it's not a for-profit business model. It is a non-profit organization. Yeah,
I see. So in some way, people who help you run this business with resources are companies which sponsor your programs, and your programs are, I went on your website, are supporting initiatives for young leaders, for instance, cultural exchange, entrepreneurship, and a forum, you use the word Trans-Asian Forum. I think I saw that on your documentation. Is it correct?
Yeah, exactly. So we have two focus. One is culture, one is innovation. But around those two topics, we have different initiatives to not only talk about technology or talk about cinema or theater, but we have a very large scope. So we have different initiatives. We encourage the exchange between young people in Europe and in China. So we initiated this Young Leader Program, and 2020 will be the first year actually that we have this program. And we have different other initiatives, such as a research program in collaboration with Sciences Po, which is university, a very famous university in France. We are doing research around the innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem in China, because everybody is kind of curious about how things can go so rapidly in China, and a lot of European companies or individuals, they want to learn from it. So we are doing this research, and then we are going to publish a reference book. Actually, it's kind of like a guidebook for all those people who are interested in the innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem in China. Either they are like VCs in Europe, or they are, for example, startups, entrepreneurs, or government officials in Europe. And also we have this different events. We invite those leaders in different industry to talk about either the relationship between Europe and China, or talk about their experiences and share their stories. So that is why we have this very regular breakfast conference and annual Europe-Asia Forum.
I see. Yeah, Sciences Po, for people who are not familiar with France, is a very famous university, one of the oldest one actually among the Grande École, as we say in France. Going back to what you organize, it's linked a lot with innovation, as you said before, and you are working with Sciences Po on innovation between China and Europe. My first question is how China is different regarding innovation towards the rest of the world. It seems that, and we are in a podcast called China Paradigm, so it seems that there is a China paradigm. And if I can share a little bit more about what I understand so far, China has developed its ecosystem innovation in a bit closed environment because of what we know, censorship and the big players who are not present anymore or who have failed in China. Google, Facebook, Amazon in some way. So they have created their own ecosystem, their own innovation. And of course, because of the size of the country and the resources, they have the tools to make it. But besides that, why do we need to extract China and compare to Europe? Why is it so different?
Yeah, so the research that we are doing, the definition of innovation, we are like the definition we're using is actually around entrepreneurship, meaning that we are doing a research around all the stakeholders around innovation and entrepreneurship in China. I think that part is the most special part about innovation in China, because the government, for instance, play a very important role in either pushing or restricting the development of innovation. But of course, during the last 10 years, either central government in China or local governments in China, they are using every resources they can to push initiatives such as startups. So that is one point that I want to highlight. That is government policy, and it is one part of our research as well. We have a group of 2 students who are doing research only on government policy in China for the last 6 months. And also, I think the other stakeholders are interesting and as well and very special as well in this ecosystem. There are VCs, meaning venture capitalists, and also incubators. So why are they different from, for example, their peers in Europe? Because in China, those incubators, they are active. They are very active. And also in Europe, we can see a lot of private incubators that are pretty independent. But in China, a lot of incubators, they are actually supported either by local government or supported by Chinese internet giants such as Alibaba, Tencent, etc., etc. So there are a lot of other specificities, such as the Makerspace, that we don't find it in Europe, but we find it in China. Yeah.
So what you are saying is that incubators, more specifically, VC may be different case, but incubators get the support of government and big firms, where in Europe or in the US, it maybe has never been the case to get too much support from the government, but also very recently only from big firms, because we see as well in Europe and in the US, big firms creating their own incubator and accelerator in the space. But you feel what you're finding is to say that has been actually at the beginning of the incubators growth in China, it was a link with government and big companies.
Yeah, in China, it's largely linked with government and supported by the companies. And also because the internet landscape in China, a lot of startups, they will be invested or they will be acquired by big internet companies in the end, at least during the last 2 years. So that is also the reason behind the current landscape of incubators.
I see. So one of the first specificity you are telling us, which is differentiating innovation in China from innovation in the West, is the role of the government, supporting at the start incubators. And we interviewed some entrepreneurs in the past. As far as I understand, the way the government is supporting is by offering free spaces and sometimes even grants in order to grow your business, and you have to commit to hire people or to do specific investments in a specific locality. What else besides the role of the government? You were mentioning Makerspace. Would you mind telling us a bit more about why Makerspace seems to be more advanced in China than in the West?
Actually, this is a very Chinese notion because if you want to find a makerspace in Europe or in the US, you wouldn't find a lot. Maybe you can find some co-working spaces, maybe you can find incubators, but makerspace is kind of a notion that is in between. So it is called 创客空间 in Chinese, meaning that people are kind of like geeky hackers, kind of cool people who want to create things, but who are also incubated and supported by the space. So because of the policies towards incubator, you have to the barrier of entry to become an incubator is pretty high. So a lot of other individuals or companies, they can do a makerspace to do not do do as complete service as incubator, but they are supporting the creators as well. So that is why the notion of makerspace is so special in China.
It's a very interesting notion. Would you mind we go a bit deeper into the concept of makerspace? My understanding so far is that makerspace are to create products, and that China, because of the links of factories, because it's a factory of the world, especially let's say Shenzhen and Guangzhou, are very good space for makers. And my understanding was that it's very linked to 3D printing and to this ecosystem of being able to build hardware. Am I correct to say so, or I am narrowing down to something too specific?
I think the notion actually shifted as well. In the beginning, because it's called makerspace, it's like people who are doing hardware, who are making prototypes. But as the time changes, the notion of makerspace also changes. I think it enlarged into kind of like an incubator of not only hardware but also software. And because the notion of incubator is just to give the startups, entrepreneurs some support around administration, or accounting, and to link them with different resources. That is kind of the services that was added into Makerspace as well.
So we talk about the government. We talk about the notion of Makerspace as specificities of China innovation compared to the West. What else would you add, if any?
Yeah, of course. So maybe people already know that the venture capitalists in China, they're very special as well, because during one period there has been a lot of U.S. or foreign venture capitalists that was investing in China, but recently, pretty recently,
like Sequoia, right?
Yes.
Sequoia and the Plug and Play, right, which are all from the US.
But now China also has some local venture capitalist, but it's a very recent phenomenon, and they are still trying to find the right Chinese model of investment instead of copying the whole US model.
My question could be naive, but I don't feel we talk about a European model. I feel we talk about a US standard for VC.
Yeah.
And you are talking about Chinese standards, but I don't feel we are talking about really European standards. And your foundation is specifically about Europe, China. Is my perception correct?
That we all know that currently there is a U.S.-China trade war. We can't avoid it, but I think it's actually an opportunity for everyone. And also, we observe that in the meantime, European startups, they want to enter into Chinese market, and they want maybe Chinese investors to maybe invest in them as well, but they don't have the resources or let's say the entrance to the resources in China. And also Chinese companies, especially internet giants and big companies, they are trying to enter into foreign market, and especially European market. But they don't have the savoir-faire. They don't know how to do that.
The know-how, yeah.
That is why we are initiating this global incubation program. It's exactly between Europe and China to let Chinese startups be incubated in Europe and also European startup be incubated in China so that they can get into the market, they can get in touch with the local venture capitalists, and they can also work with each other among them, such as, for example, if we have a European startup that can be the supplier of our Chinese startup, that will be a perfect match, and then they can be a global startup from the beginning. That is the whole point of our initiative.
Okay. To end the conversation on the specificities of innovation in China, or maybe to go further, you mentioned the role of VCs, and they are different from the US. You said specifically the US, the West. How different they are? As far as I understand, VCs have become big in the US compared to Europe because of a lot of tax incentive, because you can put your loss into the accounting and you deduct from taxes and so on. And that had made VCs big, and VCs take more and more risk, and wealthy people take risk because they could deduct from taxes. And I understood that in Europe, that wouldn't take off as much because this tax incentive was not as strong. What about China? I'm not specifically talking about taxes, but what makes VCs in China different besides the fact that they are based in China?
I think VCs in China, they are, as I talk about, they are still growing. They are trying to find their own model. But a lot of the individuals that are in the Chinese VC firms, they were actually in foreign VC firms, especially Japanese or American VC firms. So currently, we haven't been observing a lot of differentiation of Chinese VCs in comparison with foreign VCs, but I do think that in the upcoming years we're going to observe more and more booming VCs, like super VCs, that are going to be investing in a lot of emerging startups in China.
A report which is dating back, I think now it's a bit older than 8 years, something like this, from McKinsey, was saying that innovation in China is more social. Basically, the go-to-market is quicker. The tests on the market are faster, where innovation in Europe and the West is seen as more fundamental innovation, where research would take longer, and the go-to-market would maybe not be considered totally initially, and would be at least delayed. Do you think that's still the case now, or do you think China is also investing in fundamental innovation and is taking time to perfect a product before going to market?
I think China is definitely also investing a lot in R&D and very scientific researches. In comparison with Europe, things are going even faster in China because the whole ecosystem is more eager to achieve a certain goal quickly in comparison with Europe. In Europe, we observe that a lot of initiatives are either governmental or they are being done by bigger companies and historical companies such as energy company EDF or Airbus, this kind of companies. That is why I think you were talking about, fundamental research in Europe because of those sectors, isn't it? In China, it's more a lot of B2C sectors, and that is why, because we have a bigger market, of course, that is why the go-to market is faster as well.
Yeah, I keep being surprised by the fact that we talk about Europe as I said as well, more fundamental innovation with big firms, where in China you have very big state-owned firms, but still the private sectors and innovators through the private sectors have been very dynamic. That kind of paradox I have a hard time to explain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, do you have an explanation for that?
Yeah, I think the nature of the big firms are different. In China, we are mostly talking about tech giants like BAT, like Alibaba, Tencent, or even today ByteDance. But when we're talking about big firms who are investing in innovation in France, for instance, we are talking about energy companies. We are talking about Total. We are talking about EDF. Those are more historical companies. They are changing slower than the tech companies. That is pretty normal. So maybe that is also one of the reasons why things are going slower but more steadily in Europe, and things are going faster in tech sector in China.
I've been in China for 10 years, and what I've seen is that innovative products have not Chinese innovative products have not succeeded only in China, which was the case still 5 or 6 years ago, but now worldwide. Mm-hmm. Xiaomi is present worldwide. Huawei, of course, is present worldwide, but it has been longer. Higher here as well. But what is I feel very new is that China is also successful for cultural products like TikTok. Mm-hmm. And TikTok is a cultural product. It's mm-hmm. a product where you feed with content, which could actually be very different from one country to another, from one culture to another. Mm-hmm. What are the next frontiers for China innovation in your mind? Mm-hmm. Or the relationship with China innovation? I have in mind the fact that I feel that Europe is not leveraging all the innovation in China. But besides this one, what are the next frontiers for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from my point of view, as you talk about, a lot of hardwares were going overseas, let's say, because in Chinese we say 出海. So a lot of companies and brands, they are going overseas to search for international market during the last, let's say, 20 years already. But a pretty recent trend is that a lot of software company, or let's say service and apps, are going overseas as well. In terms of next frontier, I would say cultural and entertainment applications are definitely going abroad. They are already trying to enter and already entered into Indian and Southeast Asia market. And I think in the near future, they will be in the European and the US market. As you mentioned, TikTok is definitely the best example to illustrate this, because ByteDance has been deploying this international strategy and it's working very well. But I think ByteDance is not the only one and will not be the only one that will succeed in international market. In Southeast Asian market, we also see a Chinese giant called YY is localizing a lot of its services and apps and are succeeding in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and in India, such as a gaming and social app called Hago, and also some other different apps for different kind of segments. So to answer your question, I think you are right. It's definitely the next big thing that we have to observe, an opportunity that we have to seize. The relationship between China and the world will be closer and closer in this sense. So definitely we have to look into it.
At the opposite, where do you feel through your research and the meetings you had in this sector, where do you feel Europe is strong toward China? When Chinese think about innovation in Europe, where they should look at?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Chinese companies are definitely very interested in European R&D, research and development. A lot of European universities, they have very, very advanced laboratories around such as biological or medical research. And also, for example, air flights, how do you call it in English? Aeronautic researches in France is very advanced as well. I think those kind of sectors are definitely the strongest sector that are attracting most attention from Chinese companies and investors. And in the recent years, we can also see a lot of Chinese companies, they are either acquiring or investing in a lot of technological firms, especially in Germany.
So the patterns you are seeing in Chinese investing in Europe is more fundamental R&D and would I say hardware as well? Because you're talking about airplanes, you're talking about, I guess, robotics with Germany and factories. Have you found out some patterns in what China is doing in Europe in terms of investment in innovation?
I can give a quick example. Very recently, Chinese internet giants Tencent invested in a French startup called Lydia. This is not one of those companies who are doing hardware, who are doing research and development, but a very go-to-market app which is used by a lot of people for peer-to-peer payment. So this actually is part of the going overseas strategy of Tencent, of WeChat Pay, to have a part of the cake in payment, international payment as well. So it is definitely a great news for, at the same time, the startup, because they're receiving a huge amount of investment, but it's a good news for Tencent as well. So we can see that other than the examples that we are giving regarding those sectors that are more traditional, medical sector, biological sector, robotics, we can also see an emerging trend of the other kind of startups that are being invested in by Chinese companies.
What kind of deal was it with Linda, right?
Lydia.
Lydia. Oh, Linda is a software, online learning software bought by LinkedIn. What was kind of deal between Tencent and Lydia? It was a full acquisition, purely investment, partnership?
Yeah, I think recently it's in January this year. It's last month. Tencent invested in fintech company Lydia. So Lydia currently has 3 million users in France, which is a huge number for the population of France. So that is why it attracted the attention of Tencent and the WeChat Pay. So we all know that WeChat Pay already tried to enter into India market and Southeast Asia by acquiring or investing in local companies. And this definitely is part of the international acquisition as well. So it is an investment of 40 million euros. So it is pretty high price for the investment.
On the other hand, so we talked about the Chinese companies investing in Europe. When we look at Europe investing in China, you mentioned before through your incubator and your service as incubator that it's hard for European companies to enter the Chinese market and to catch the Chinese innovation. There are many difficulties, barrier language, ecosystem, and so on. But how do you analyze the fact that a company like Amazon, for instance, failed? We understand that Google, Facebook failed because of regulation on censorship, but Amazon is different. There was no censorship issue. Similarly for Uber, it's not a censorship issue. It's a business, it's operations. How do you see the fact that so many tech companies have failed in China, and not only because of regulations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those examples that you were giving were actually very interesting. But there is also another example of a European company, is Carrefour. Carrefour exited China last year in October as well, because Carrefour was kind of the first supermarket in China that were succeeding. So it was a surprising fact that is actually failing in China, and it chose to leave the Chinese market. So the answer for your question would be that a lot of companies, they have a hard time adapting their pace to Chinese market, because when well, I talk with people in Carrefour as well, but maybe it's not an official answer. So basically, when we have to do a lot of decision making in the headquarters in Europe, and we have to adapt it to Chinese market, it will take a long time for the decision making and for local adaptation. And sometimes it's very hard to stay in Europe and understand how things work in China, how things are changing fast in China. So that is why a lot of decision making, they are not adapted to the maybe the Chinese local situation, to the Chinese market. And that is why a lot of the companies are failing in China. It is the case maybe for Carrefour and for other traditional sectors, because they didn't adapt e-commerce and offline delivery fast enough. For Uber and for Amazon, it's kind of like a calculation, right? They are making less money in China as they wanted, and it's better to be bought out or to exit the Chinese market. It's more, the return of investment is better for them if they do so. So it's a choice, it's a mathematical choice.
Does it make sense if I say, and would you agree with the thing that when you go to China, whatever the size of your business, even if you are a mature business, a very successful business in the West, you have to start again. You have to reconsider your product. You have to reconsider your distribution channels.
Mm-hmm.
You have to reconsider how you acquire clients. For instance, businesses which build their dominance on search, on Google, would not be able to do the same on Baidu, because actually people in China don't look for the same information in the search engine. They would not look for a product to buy. They would go directly on Tmall, Taobao. Does it make sense for you, or you think the difficulties are more structural than this?
I think it's definitely right what you said, and that is why I think Daxue Consulting is doing a great job by introducing people to the Chinese market, by actually localized all the services and adapt things to Chinese consumers' demands. So
thanks for the mention.
Yeah.
Our guests are sponsors there. Thank you. But what's your view on it? I mean, does it mean that on the opposite, does it worth going into a market if you have to reconsider everything you do? I remember Armani coming to China, and they painted their doors. I think it's Armani, a long time ago. They painted the doors in red, looking Chinese. And actually, Chinese didn't want to buy Chinese. They wanted to buy Armani. And they actually didn't go to this shop. So on the opposite, changing all your product can basically make you worthless. I mean, worth nothing. If the luxury products have changed for China, they wouldn't be successful in China. So what's your analysis on this aspect, that what needs to be changed, adapted, and what doesn't need to be?
Depends on the sector, of course. In terms of services, I think your distribution channel, your marketing tools definitely have to change, have to adapt to Chinese users' habits. That is pretty normal. And if you have to change or not your product, that is that really depends on the product itself. Sometimes you have to, of course, localize the product, especially when it comes to culture and entertainment product. But sometimes you can just stay the way you are, especially for European brands. They always have this heritage and the brand image behind it. And sometimes Chinese consumers, they are buying the things for this kind of heritage and brand image. They don't want a thing that is totally adapted to the Chinese style, Chinese market. Such as for luxury brand, I think a lot of them have to do market research before implementing their product into Chinese market. Some brands actually failed because they kind of was doing a mixture of Eastern and Western style that wasn't a very nice, either for European market or for Chinese market. So it was a failure. So I think in terms of product, we also have to consider case by case.
I think there is a keyword we have not used, is open innovation. Have you looked into this topic through your research?
Yeah, in our research with Sciences Po Paris, we haven't been looking into open innovation. But me personally, I'm very interested in this topic as well. It's not in the scope of Europe-China Foundation yet, but it will be a future topic that is interesting to look into. So in terms of open innovation, I think a lot of European companies, they are making a great effort in doing so because, as we mentioned, European companies, they are, especially those historical industrial companies, they are very huge, and their pace of innovation doesn't catch up with the evolution of innovation in terms of technology. So that is why they're trying to work more and more with different startups to try to inspire their internal teams, and also to learn from the startups. And also that is also why we have this Europe-China incubation program, so that big companies who are interested in the innovation in the incubated startups can help the startups and can collaborate with the startups to get not only into the other part of the world, into the market, but also have the technology.
Yeah, for people who are listening to us and I may not be familiar with what open innovation is, open innovation is for bigger companies to catch the innovation through smaller companies by opening up their doors in one way or another. It could be competition, could be investment, could be sending people from this bigger company to the smaller company to interact with them in their office and see what kind of synergy they can have. That's a very trendy topic, and actually we have been asked to work on this a few times, and I feel that getting bigger and bigger, especially foreign companies, so not only European, going to China and entering through open innovation by partnering with others. In the past, we would have called that joint venture, but here we are talking about more open innovation. Now we are moving to the last questions I always ask to the interviewee.
Yeah. What book do I like the most, right?
Yeah, inspired you most in your work, in your life. Yeah.
Well, I think a recent book that I really like is the book written by Kai-Fu Lee, which is about AI competition between US and China. It doesn't mention directly Europe, but I think in the current trade war and AI competition between Europe and China is definitely interesting for everyone in China and in Europe to read it. The book is called AI Superpower, China, Silicon Valley, and the New World Order. So it mentioned not only historically how China advanced from a copycat to an innovation hub, but also mentioned the future, how China and the US will evaluate in the AI sector.
Yeah, it has been mentioned. The book has been mentioned by other interviewees. It seems to have become a bestseller. What do you read to be up to date on China?
In terms of website, in terms of news, right?
Yeah, anything that could be useful for the audience to know, specifically in English, could be Chinese, but more specifically in English.
Yeah, I think the website called 36KR is definitely very interesting. They have a lot of updated information every day around China. And recently they have this going overseas special section, meaning that they are listing all the news of Chinese companies or startups, the product who are trying to penetrate into foreign market, either in Southeast Asia or in the world. So for Chinese companies and foreign companies, it's very important to read about those sectors because they are actually competitors or they are offers in the market.
36KR is in Chinese, right?
Yes.
Do you have other sources that the audience who may be English speaking could use?
Yeah, it's exactly the 36KR. They have a recently English version. The English version is called 36KR Global. So it is
I see.
English. It is the English version of the Chinese media.
Yeah, the same as Taishin has a Taishin Global. But
Yeah.
do you know why it's a 36KR, by the way? What's the name?
Actually, I don't know. It's a very good question, but it sounds very geeky.
It looks like,
It's
right?
a technological media.
What book on China would you recommend for the audience?
For the audience, recently I was reading a book around the business ecosystem in China, and another book about 4 types of different companies in China. Though both 2 books have the same author. So the author is a professor in a business school in Germany. Let me search for the book to see the author. So the book Business Ecosystem in China talks about 4 companies, Alibaba, Tencent, Xiaomi, and Lego. So we all know that Lego is not working anymore, but it gives a very deep analysis, especially to Alibaba. So this book, I think it's a great book that was written in 2017 for all those who are interested in China. However, there is another book written by the same author called Mark J. Griven that is around 4 types of innovators in China. It's pretty recent. It was published in 2019, and the name of the book is Pioneers, Hidden Champions, Changemakers, and Underdogs. And it is about lessons from Chinese innovators. And it's written by, at the same time, Mark and also George Yip and Wei Wei.
If you had some extra time beside all you do, what would you work on?
Yeah, so after helping other startups, after studying other startups, I am very eager to actually create my own startup as well because I see others' opportunities, I see others' patterns. I think everybody who has a dream has to seize this opportunity, and to go global, to not only be a local startup in Europe or in China, but be a global startup that is serving everyone. So I think my next goal will be doing a global startup from the beginning of the business.
I see. What success in China you have witnessed and you wouldn't have expected to be a success? I always ask this question, and I'm to tell more about why. Is that Peter Drucker, the thinker of strategy, business strategy, was saying we can assess innovation and change through a success we were not expecting, and similarly through a failure we're not expecting, which is actually assessing the best, a change in society.
Yeah, a success that I didn't expect. I think many success had their reason, but I've been witnessing a lot of young people. They are creating startups. They are setting up business since a very young age, and they are succeeding in the international market. I'll just give a very quick example, but very interesting example about a company in Shenzhen. It's called Insta 3060. So they are doing this kind of 3060 camera. You can actually shoot a scene, and then it can be shown in VR headset, for instance. It is, let's say, a niche market, and they are the leader, the top three, let's say, in this market. And a lot of video makers or amateurs or fans, they are using their different products. And next year they might do IPO. So they are a group of young people currently who are 27 years old or 28 years old. They created their company right after university, after bachelor's degree, so around 22 years old. So it's a very Chinese story. Young people are collaborating, are creating, and they're growing very fast in the international market. I think that is very surprising, but well, no surprise either.
So what's surprising to you is the fact that young people create startups, or is it the fact that they go internationally very quickly?
I think both. They are very young, but they are growing very quickly internationally. At the same time, they have this support from investors in China, but also they are benefiting from the fact that, China is very strong in manufacturing, so they have great suppliers and very quick supply chain. Yeah.
At the opposite, what failure in the Chinese market you have witnessed and you were not expecting?
Yeah, so I have a friend who actually has a traveling company, tourism company in China. And recently, because of the coronavirus, the business was very well, but it's surprisingly failing because of the unresistible factors. So that is one very sad story that that I heard recently.
Yeah.
Hopefully everything will go better in China after
hopefully
this crisis.
we are recording. Yeah, we are recording in February 20th, and it's still going on. So about failure, would you mind sharing a failure which is witnessing maybe something more long term? You mentioned one which is interesting is Carrefour. 10 years ago, nobody would have thought that Carrefour would sell for such a cheap price. All the hypermarket and supermarket in China, and that the deterioration would actually come so fast. Do you have other failures which surprised you?
Well, in China, I think, as we say, 99% of the startups fail, and we don't remember those failure stories. I think not a very recent example, but one example is Dangdang website. So
True.
They were succeeding. They were supposed to be Amazon of China, but because but they would have been Amazon in general by selling everything, but they kind of didn't have a right strategy, and now they are not the top ones when people are searching for books, when people are searching for e-commerce. They're not looking in Dangdang anymore. So that is one failure. And recently we also have the scandal between the founders. So yeah, it's a very interesting story that we don't have time to dig into.
Yeah. Interesting to see that JD.com, which was not existing when Dangdang was created, I think JD came later, took much more space, market share than Dangdang at that time, where it was the place to go to buy
Mm-hmm.
books,
Yeah.
more than Taobao and Tmall at the time. Thanks for being with us, Ingde, and it was very, very instructive on innovation. Indeed, we could do like 2 or 3 hours on that.
Yeah. Thank you, Matthieu, for having me.
Thanks, and a few words for the virus, which is still actually heavy in China, and we hope that things are going to go back to normal very quickly, and express our support to people who suffer from it.
Yeah. All the
Bye bye,
best
everyone.
to friends in China. Yeah. Bye.